So you remember Howard Dean, 2004, he was the man who screamed, but he was also the man who campaigned the first post-dot-com boom election. He gathered a huge email list, he got great amounts of campaign funds from that, and maybe that was what technology was going to do to party politics. And if that's the case, I'm kind of not terribly excited. Okay, the source of your funding is different. Maybe what technology is going to do is it's going to put Prime Minister's debates onto YouTube instead of onto ITV. I'm not very excited. But I am excited by what I think technology is doing to politics. And I think it's going to transform it faster and more dramatically than actually most of us have a sense is happening. And to see how that's happening, why it's happening, and its early signs, I think we have to look at sort of invisible democracy, underground democracy. And that's the democracy of the grassroots. It's neighborhood email groups, it's discussion forums in NGOs, it's organizations like Open Democracies I've been associated with, like Avaz, like 38 Degrees here. These are the organizations that are going to be changing something, and I'll give you an example, very detailed example, of how that change is happening and will lead to an avalanche, a tipping point in our politics, I think. But first I want to say a little bit about what politics is. Rohan told us about policy and his interest in policy, and that's, you know, a very big part of it, but I want to talk to you about politics. And politics, I think, in its essence hasn't changed since Moses. Since Moses essentially taught the world to turn a bunch of slaves into a nation. What was the process that was involved in that? There are essentially three big steps. Step number one is you gather a people. Step number two, he did, by the way, with the help of a rather authoritarian and frightening omniscient God, Paso. Step number two is you give that people a story, and it's a story about a common future, a promised land, and it's also a story about a shared past. It's something that places us, that we all together have done, we've come from, things we're proud of, things we regret, a past and a future. That's creating the imaginary community that is a nation. And the third thing that you do is you bring the law, you put some law onto it, you do the state, you do the policy. And the law essentially has got two elements. It's got to do with how you organize within, and it's also got to do with what your relationship is to your environment out there. How do you bring down the walls of Jericho? How is this people going to get to the promised land? You need the law as well for that. So politics is that process, that three-step process of joining the people, the nation, and the state. My basic contention to you is that the barriers to entry to the template that Moses gave us have basically disappeared because of technology. And let me give you the example of Londoners on Bikes. So Londoners on Bikes was a campaign, a pop-up party that I co-founded in 2010, just months before the mayoral election. Our people were London cyclists, our promised land was Dutch-style safe cycling, and our state had the two elements. It had internal organisation, which was extremely consensual, extremely democratic, open, rather jazz-handy, and our external bit of the state, our relationship to the environment that we're in. How are we going to bring down the walls of Jericho, or rather influence whoever it was going to be in City Hall? That was our political tactic. So we had those three elements. Now, we needed technology to bring all that together in a very short period of time, and we very quickly settled on a political tool called Nation Builder. Now, you may know, Nation Builder is the tool the Labour Party is using, it's the tool that the SNP, I think, have used. It's a basic tool that makes those three elements that Moses collect people, a database, create the nation, the imaginary nation, by communicating with them about the past and the future, and have a system of internal organisation, raise money, get people to this meeting, get actions done over here. We had that tool, Nation Builder, essentially the same tool that the Labour Party has to organise its however many hundreds of thousands of members it now has. And we had it up and running in 3 weeks. So the barrier to entry to the game that Moses played, that Moses taught us, has essentially disappeared. Now, what did we do with this at Londoners on Bikes? We collected 7,000, in the course of 3 months, we collected 7,000 vote pledges from cyclists. The mayoral election was won by 20,000 votes. So, as we were running up to the election, that pledge of 7,000 votes was sufficient for us to get every single candidate for City Hall to sign up to the London Cycling's campaign's Go Dutch cycling principles. So essentially, our success was not to get someone into City Hall. Our political hack, as it were, was to make sure that whoever was in City Hall had a cycling policy that essentially was constrained by the actions of Londoners on Bikes. That was the external relations, the political hack that we engineered, and it worked. So, I have really 3 lessons that, to my mind, come out of that story and of many other stories rather similar to it. The first, as I've said, is the barriers to entry to the old game of politics, the age-old game of politics, have essentially disappeared. What that means is that change is going to come very quickly, because barriers to entry on this sort of scale, sort of a whole system was built on the assumption that they were going to stay there. Those pillars have gone, and the change is going to be rapid and quite sudden. The second point is that every political system, whichever one it is, this is happening all over the world, but whichever one it is, every political system can be hacked. We're seeing it most obviously now with the SNP, the Scottish nationalists, and UKIP, the English nationalists. The point is, in the UK system, the way you hack Westminster is by getting, because of first past the post, a geographically concentrated support base. So geographic nationalisms, the SNP and UKIP, are what comes out as the natural political hacks. You're going to get political entrepreneurs using these tools in taking advantage of the low barriers to entry, and whatever the political system is, you're going to attract a certain number of successful hacks. They're all going to be tested. So expect a lot more political hacking. And the third point here has got to do with what that means for the old 3, the mainstream 3 political parties. They're being hollowed out. So in the Londoners on Bikes example, essentially we took over the cycling policy of the candidates. So the old story, the old game that attracted people into political parties and to control political organizations was, okay, you get control of the party gets you into power, and you then have a lot of latitude to exercise power. That latitude is going because you've given up your a whole lot of your degrees of freedom. So the political party, the old political party, is being hollowed out at the expense of the myriad of small nations that are being created Moses style. So let me just finish very briefly by saying something about open democracy. This is happening all over Europe. We see it in the rise of these populist parties and populist movements. There's actually no guarantee that the process is going to be either open or democratic. And open democracy is the place that's excited about this transformation that's coming about, but it's also worried about the sorts of, it wants to shape that outcome so that it is open and democratic. So it is a place where you'll find, as happily, people from the right, like Pete Robourne, Roger Scruton, as people from the left, like Anthony Barnett or Mary Kaldor. These are people who understand the great opportunities ahead, but have a sense also the huge danger that these transformations are bringing about. It's not, Marine Le Pen, Jobbik, and Golden Dawn are taking advantage of this just as much as the great grassroots organizations. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to invite our speakers up onto stage if they'd like to grab a chair. And I don't know if anyone in our audience has any questions.